As we look at Zechariah 13 to 14, we will see forward-looking prophecies about the last days, where God finally will bring together all the goodness and justice that he has fully promised. And as we've been looking at the ancient Israelite prophets over time, there's been a lot of doom and gloom. It's not because these guys were particularly negative or gloomy. It's that the individuals in their society had collectively chosen to cheat on God, to be unfaithful to him over many, many years. And thereby, God had to tell them, well, you've broken the covenant. Here are the consequences. And yet, there's hope. So if we look at Zechariah 13 to 14, you can look for the pattern we've seen elsewhere of indictment, judgment, instructions, and aftermath. And by the way, you may only find portions of those. It may not always be all 4 items there. But let's listen to all that God promises to do to finally bring peace and prosperity to the world when he comes to rule and reign in righteousness. Let's look at verse 1 of chapter 13. In that day, there shall be a fountain opened to the house of David and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanness. So this sense of healing that will happen. And the holy city Jerusalem, which is symbolizing God's kingdom, that all people who have been sinful or unclean will now be cleansed by this spring of water. So imagine the atonement that's cleansing people. Verse 2, and it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and they shall no more be remembered, and I also will cause the prophets and the unclean spirit to pass out of the land. We're talking the false prophets of false gods and false idols. And one shall say unto him, what are the wounds in thine hands? Then he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. We're still talking about the end of days, the last days. So chapter 14 opens with all the death and destruction that's going to happen in Jerusalem. And yet then God comes. We have in verse 4, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east side. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley, and half the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Verse 6, and it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it will be light. So there's this prophecy that Jesus will come, and there'll be an impact on the sunlight, that God himself is the source of light. That's how I read it. Verse 8, and it shall be in that day that living waters, this is flowing waters versus stagnant waters, shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, and half of them toward the hinder. In summer and in winter shall it be. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name is one. I love that. God himself will come to his holy city, Jerusalem, and the waters are symbols of the life-giving power God has for all of us. And even though there's a lot of difficulty and challenge and death and destruction that has been prophesied and definitely has happened in the past for the Israelites, God is saying, I will eventually wipe away all tears. I will resolve all injustice and all pain and all suffering, and I will bring the goodness that everybody looks forward to. What I also love about this is implicitly the invitation for us not to simply just wait for God to act, but that we can build the kingdom of God in our time, in our lives. We can share a bit of that living water with others. We ourselves cannot solve every problem in the world. God ultimately will have to help. But we should be anxiously engaged in a good cause to help build God's kingdom and to spread that light, that goodness, that truth, those living waters that ultimately he will permanently bring for all people.